Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. Guardian of the Crown, Saga of Willow North, Book 2. Again, this was just, this was actually the book that made me trip over this series. I was just doing that thing where you're looking for things to read, like I said last week, and found this one and took it out of the library and then, well, on overdrive because it's an ebook, and then discovered it was the second in a series and went back to the beginning. Anyways, so you can see from this particular picture, from the background, which evokes Hagia Sophia rather stridently, or sectors of the Middle East, that this country of Eskandel, which is to the south of where we started, Tremontaine, is very clearly some sort of pseudo-Middle Eastern deal. So Willow North, who is the titular character and the rather dramatic picture on the cover here, she has managed to get the prince safely to Eskandel. She's managed to get her erstwhile true love, Karish Sergian, or rather Sergian Karish, because this author has decided that this is a people who do the family name followed by given name, as you find in places like the Far East, as opposed to the way we do it here in the West, which is given name, family name. But anyways, she's managed to actually get them safely to Eskandel. But when they arrived, they were going to ask Karish's mother for help because Karish's family are more or less nobility, and so they were going to ask her for help getting the prince back onto the throne, except that, as his mother points out, you're trying to ask the people of Eskandel to interfere in the goings-on in a sovereign country with which, while they are, not at war, you can't just sort of waltz into a different country and say, we think that the person who's declared himself king shouldn't be king. And so this whole book is about, among other things, the political machinations that go on in the background of this book that have to be done in order to convince the Eskandel people, or rather the Eskandelic government, such as it is, that they need to support Prince Felix. The thing is, or rather King Felix, because in spite of the fact that he is uncrowned, everybody's calling him King Felix in that way of saying, the king is dead, his son would be the king after him, so, in every way except for the part where he's officially been crowned, this kid is the king. Anyways, the thing is that their political situation is fascinating. It's this weird, not exactly it's like a democratic oligarchy. This idea that she's come up with, that every period of time, every year, a bunch of families basically compete to get themselves voted to be the family that will have control of the government. And so you have this collective of noble families who all get the voting rights to choose the family that will be in charge of everything for the next year. And so there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of shifting alliances, and the Sergian family is up for election that year. And so part of what's going on is that they have to both get themselves voted for, as well as get a question put on a ballot, because families basically, you have to go up there before the coming year and say, here's the issues we want to talk about, and everybody gets to vote on what it is that we're going to discuss. Taxes, or in this case, one of the two main battling, comparative battling priorities, which are the Sergian family's priority of getting Felix on the throne of Tremontaine next door, and the family that they are in competition with, who is the enemy, at least for the duration of this particular book. They have a plan to go on a expedition across the ocean to the south to a country to get riches or what have you. And so basically, the one of the points of discussion winds up being at one point that if people vote for the expedition, they're not going to also vote for supporting Felix, because the kind of resources that you would have to put into making both of these things happen at the same time are prohibitive, and you can only have one of these. Oddly enough, in this particular book, everybody winds up voting for both, which I think speaks to the nature of democracy and the fact that people don't pay attention to how money works or how government money works. Anyway, I find that so fascinating that I almost don't care about, like, I find all of this world building stuff so fascinating that I almost really don't care about the fact that she spends the entire book angsting about her relationship with Karish, which it turns out that their relationship fell apart because she had an ethical, moral problem with him working for the Ascendants, who are mostly corrupt sorcerers. Like, as I said in the last one, they're kind of magic users in the X-Men mutant sort of way, that everybody has a power and you can use your magic to make that power work. But, it's not like they're traditional sorcerers who can do a bunch of different things. They can do one thing. You can make people tell the truth, or you can read minds, or you can blow stuff up. So it's a lot like X-Men superpowers. But the thing is that the Ascendants have mostly been put into a position in Tremontaine society where they've been corrupted, etc., etc. And she was very, very appalled at Karish using his ability as a dowser to help the Ascendants, because what dowsers do is they act, as I said last time, they act like batteries for the Ascendants, giving the Ascendants the ability to use their magical powers more. The thing is that that she had an objection to Karish working with the man who was Felix's uncle and turns out to have been the guy who pulled off a bloody coup and took over the country, even though Ascendants aren't supposed to be allowed on the throne. But Karish objected to Willow being a thief because, of course, being a thief is a dangerous occupation and occasionally morally suspect at best. And Tremontaine is a country in which if a thief is caught, their hand gets cut off, which, not only does it mean that you can't work any job that requires two hands after that point, it also means that everyone knows that you're a thief because you only have one hand, and therefore you can't get a job because nobody trusts you. Not to mention all the other stuff that can happen and the illnesses setting in from the hand being chopped off, all of that stuff. So they had a massive argument where she had asked him to marry her, but they'd had a massive argument afterwards where she wanted him to stop doing what he loved and he wanted her to stop doing what she loved, and neither of them would give it up. And so she spends a large portion of the book thinking to herself, well, if neither of us was willing to give it up, neither of us was willing to compromise, then clearly we don't love each other enough to be together, which is not an irrational side of things, not an irrational thought. It's something that comes up in a sort of sideways way when you're watching Stargate SG-1 and the whole Jack O'Neill and Sam Carter romance, where she can't be with her commanding officer that way, but they both love their job so much that neither of them is going to ask for a transfer to be out of each other's respective lines of command. And so they give up on the romance because they care about their jobs more. And it's an important thing to note, which is that if you're not willing to compromise on anything, your relationship won't work out. Well, by the end of this book, the way it winds up working out is that they've A, both matured as people sufficiently, and B, both of their lives have taken such a turn that those problems that they had before are no longer an issue. And they wind up getting back together by the end of the book. So, but the thing is, I really, the world building is so fascinating to me, including this society that she's come up with, which is run by harems of women, except that harem may not be quite the correct term. Oh, it's the term in English that you might use, except that the harem is not a bunch of women subservient to the whims of a man who keeps them all locked away somewhere while he runs things. The harem is the women who run the government, while the man is kind of there for reasons, to sort of act as their voice in public because there's a bunch of women and they need a single representative, so that's kind of his job. It's a very odd dynamic, which places the power in female hands. It's not quite a matriarchal society, but there's a great deal of leaning that way. This is one of those slightly odd constructions in a novel where it's in a place that's kind of like some place that existed in history, except everything is a great deal more socially equal, which is really, really odd to read when you start thinking about it in context of the societies that she is borrowing cultural concepts from, or at least aesthetics from. Anyway, but one of the concepts that they have also is that harems tend to have a sort of a household spy thief person whose job is to be able to break into places and sneak stuff and take stuff. And she basically gets named, that she gets named as the Eskandelic thief, guardian thief person, only attached to Felix in particular, that she is his whatever the word is, which I didn't write down because I don't take notes. And it's such an interesting, it's such an interesting idea. I mean, it's interesting, of course, in the same way that that Section 31 in Star Trek is interesting. That idea that there have to be spies somewhere, that even if everybody else is perfectly happy to do this, you're going to need counter spies because the other people will have spies. And so there's a lot in this book that I just find interesting from a purely world-building perspective. And then you get to the end of this book where you get what's really a fundamentally odd concept when you consider it in relation to countries that have monarchies. And that is that young Felix, everybody starts saying that basically Willow gets told by several people, and it's something that she winds up having to agree with conceptually at least, that Felix will be deeply unhappy as king, and he won't be a very good king because he's too sweet and sensitive. Now, it's an interesting idea, and I kind of applaud the notion of somebody saying, you know, we should have a kingdom be taken over by a grown-up who's able to handle a kingdom. But at the same time, he's 8 years old, and 8-year-olds can grow into and learn how to be properly ruthless if you train them properly. But nobody really seems to want to. Apparently, they expect an 8-year-old has to show that kind of necessary hardness of heart that early on, which is kind of weird and silly. Anyways, so that's more or less where the book leaves off, and that she's going to pick somebody else to be the king, and I'll see you all next week.